This video is on factoring trinomials with coefficients other than 1. To factor a trinomial of the form ax squared plus bx plus c when a is greater than 1, we will use factoring by grouping. First, we want to find two numbers whose product is a times c and whose sum is b. Then we're going to use these two numbers to rewrite our middle term. Now that we have four factors, we are going to factor by grouping. So let's take a look at a couple examples here. So the first one is 2x squared plus 11x plus 15. So I can't just look for two numbers that multiply to 15 and add to 11 because of that 2 in front of the x squared. So now I'm going to look for two numbers whose product is whatever a times c is. Two numbers that multiply to 2 times 15, or two numbers that multiply to 30. And then those same two numbers have to add up to b, which is 11. So two numbers that multiply to 30 and add to 11, I'm thinking 6 and 5. Okay, and I'm not just going to put these directly into the parentheses as I did when a was equal to 1. I need to use these two numbers to rewrite my middle term of 11x. So I'm going to rewrite this as 2x squared plus 6x plus 5x plus 15. Now it doesn't matter if I'd put 5x first and then 6x, it's going to turn out either way. Now that I have four terms, I'm going to factor this by grouping. So I'll put parentheses around the first two, parentheses around the last two, and look for a greatest common factor in each set of parentheses. So for the first one here, it's going to be 2x, and that's going to leave me with an x plus 3. And on my second set of parentheses, it's going to be a 5. And that's going to leave me with an x plus 3. And since I have this repeated factor, that's going to be the greatest common factor of each of those. So my final answer is going to be 2x plus 5 times x plus 3. Second example is 10x squared minus x minus 3. So again, I'm going to look for two numbers that multiply to a times c. So 10 times negative 3 is negative 30. And then the same two numbers have to add up to b, my coefficient of x, which is a negative 1. Remember, I don't want the x, I just want the coefficient. So two numbers that multiply to 30 and add to negative 1, I'm thinking that's going to be a negative 6 and a positive 5. Okay, so I'm going to use those two numbers to rewrite my negative 1x in the middle. So that's going to be 10x squared minus 6x plus 5x minus 3. Notice I haven't changed the problem at all. All I did was kind of broke apart that negative 1x in the middle to be negative 6x plus 5x so that I have four terms and I can factor by grouping. So let's put parentheses around each one of those and take out a greatest common factor. So here I'm going to have a 2x, and that's going to leave me with 5x minus 3. And it doesn't look like I have a greatest common factor here, so I'm going to have to take a 1 out of there. So that's going to leave me with a 5x minus 3, which ends up being my repeated factor. So my final answer is 2x plus 1 times 5x minus 3. So here are a couple practice problems I'd like for you to try on your own right now. So stop the video and do these two problems in your math journal. So let's take a look at these. So I have 6x squared minus 17x plus 12. So I'm going to look for two numbers whose product is 6 times 12, which is 72, and whose sum is a negative 17. Well, the first numbers that come to mind when I think of 72 are 8 and 9, which also work well for 17, but not a negative 17. So actually both of those are going to have to be negative. So I'm going to use those two numbers to rewrite my negative 17x in the middle. So I'll have 6x squared minus 8x minus 9x plus 12. And it doesn't matter if I'd put the negative 9x first and the negative 8x second. We're going to end up with the same thing. So let's go ahead and put parentheses around those to factor by grouping. Here I'm going to make sure I grab that negative and put a plus up here. So instead of minus 9x, I'm going to think of it as plus a negative 9x. And I'll take a greatest common factor out of my first set of parentheses. That leaves me with 3x minus 4. Greatest common factor out of here, and since it starts with a negative, let's take a negative 3 out. And that leaves me with 3x minus 4. And so then I have my repeated factor, which is the greatest common factor of each term, and my second factor, which is kind of what's left over. So that factors into 3x minus 4 times 2x minus 3. And our last example here is 8x squared plus 18x minus 5. So I'm going to look for two numbers whose product is a negative 40, because that's 8 times negative 5, and whose sum is 18. So when I'm thinking of 40 and 18, maybe it's like a 2 and a 20. Let's try that. And one of those is going to have to be negative to give me a negative 40, but to make it be a positive 18, my 2 is going to have to be negative. So rewriting this, I'll have 8x squared minus 2x plus 20x minus 5. Let's put parentheses around those and factor by grouping. So out of this I can take a 2x, and that's going to leave me with a 4x minus 1. Out of my second set of parentheses I can take out a 5, and that's going to leave me with a 4x minus 1. So my final answer is going to be 2x plus 5 times 4x minus 1. So in this video we took a look at how to factor trinomials that have coefficients other than 1. And to do that we're going to rewrite that middle term, rewrite that bx as two terms so that I have four terms and I can factor by grouping.